Many people invoke the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a champion of their cause. More than 50 years after his death, the civil rights icon still symbolizes hope and strength to those who fight for freedom, justice, and equal treatment under the law. In addition to being a beacon for human rights, Dr. King stood boldly against the evil of anti-Semitism and was a staunch supporter of the Jewish state of Israel. Dr. King was a Zionist. In the last 15 months of Dr. King's life, we see an increasing interest in and connection to Israel. Personal messages reveal Dr. King was planning what former Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion called the first mass pilgrimage of the American Negro community to the Holy Lands of Israel. It was to be Dr. King's second trip to the Holy Land as he and his wife Coretta visited Jordan in 1959. In his letter to Dr. King, Prime Minister Ben-Gurion said, "I would like to congratulate you on your decision, which will encourage people of all races to revive the old tradition of making pilgrimage to the Bible lands. Your contribution of spiritual leadership to your people will definitely find its fulfillment in such a pilgrimage. I am planning a trip to the United States in the near future, and I hope we will have an opportunity to meet so that I may convey these thoughts in person. With shalom greetings, D. Ben-Gurion." Dr. King wrote back to Ben-Gurion, "I am delighted to have an opportunity to lead a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. I feel that it will be a very meaningful and memorable experience for each participant. World travel is quite significant and has proven effective in our constant quest for brotherhood. I look forward to greeting you personally in the future." Less than a month after Ben-Gurion received Dr. King's reply, Israel's Six-Day War began as the Israelis defended themselves against the Arab armies of Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan. Israel miraculously won the battle, but it was only the beginning of a new ideological war against her. Israel's enemies slandered the Jewish state as colonial and imperialist. As with the Arab-Israeli Wars of 1948 and 1956, the Arab states were the aggressors in 1967. Israel did preemptively strike Egypt and Syria, but only as a strategic move to take the enemy coalition off guard. Even after winning the war, the Israelis offered concessions to the Arab League in exchange for peace. The Arab League's reply? 3 no's. No peace with Israel, no recognition of Israel, no negotiations with Israel. Nearly 1 year after the Six-Day War and just 10 days before his assassination, Dr. King was the honored guest at the 68th Annual Convention of the Rabbinical Assembly for Conservative Judaism. He was asked about the Arab-Israeli conflict and the rising tide of anti-Zionism coming from the young, militant wing of the civil rights movement. On the Middle East crisis, we've had various responses. The response of some of the so-called young militants does not represent the position of the vast majority of Negroes. There are some who are color consumed, and they see a kind of mystique in being colored, and anything non-colored is condemned. We do not follow that course in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and certainly most of the organizations in the civil rights movement do not follow that course. Dr. King continued, "I think it is necessary to say that what is basic and what is needed in the Middle East is peace. Peace for Israel is one thing. Peace for the Arab side of that world is another thing. Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all our might to protect its right to exist, its territorial integrity. I see Israel, and never mind saying it, as one of the great outposts of democracy in the world, and a marvelous example of what can be done, how desert land almost can be transformed into an oasis of brotherhood and democracy. Peace for Israel means security, and that security must be a reality." True to his unbiased commitment to justice, Dr. King also advocated for the Arabs. Peace for the Arabs means the kind of economic security that they so desperately need. These nations, as you know, are part of that third world of hunger, of disease, of illiteracy. I think that as long as these conditions exist, there will be tensions. There will be the endless quest to find scapegoats. So there is a need for a Marshall Plan for the Middle East, where we lift those who are at the bottom of the economic ladder and bring them into the mainstream of economic security. Dr. King warned the rabbis and the world that if the Arab population in what are now called the Palestinian territories did not receive help, there would be tensions in the region, and he implied that Israel would be the scapegoat. More than 50 years after his death, we see that Dr. King was absolutely correct. Israel is consistently blamed for the mistreatment of the Arab Palestinians, while leaders of the Palestinians not only oppress their own people, they profit from their misery. It is said that the Jewish people never forget a friend. And Israel remembers Dr. King's steadfastness to this day. Martin Luther King Street is in one of the most prominent neighborhoods in Jerusalem. There is also a memorial forest planted in honor of Mrs. Coretta Scott King in the Northern Galilee region. Coretta Scott King acknowledged Israel's efforts to commemorate her husband. On April 3, 1968, just before he was killed, Martin delivered his last public address. In it, he spoke of the visit he and I made to Israel. Moreover, he spoke to us about his vision of the Promised Land, a land of justice and equality, brotherhood and peace. Martin dedicated his life to the goals of peace and unity among all peoples, and perhaps nowhere in the world is there a greater appreciation of the desirability and necessity of peace than in Israel.